r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Lady of Hell. The Midnight Train Part 5, A Dinner for Two. My name is Amy and I'm still stuck on the midnight train. Last time I left you with a pretty mean cliffhanger, where my friend Lilly got infected with the rotting plague we had encountered while visiting a small town. If you have no idea what the midnight train even is, you should start here, Part 1. And if you missed the last update, check here, Part 4. Now, let's not waste any more time. You want to know what happened to Lilly and maybe also who I had dinner with and why the hell that would be important enough to name this update after it. As you already know, Lilly stumbled into my compartment in the middle of the night, obviously suffering from a fever, and collapsed on the floor almost immediately. Now you have to understand that this happened about 5 minutes before 1 a.m. Therefore I had no way to get help right away. Yes, the hunter had basically said he was in my favor, but I thought that was meant as you can ask me for a favor once and not you're free to roam around whenever you want. I was stuck for the next 3 hours with my fatally sick friend. I feel like I have to reiterate that I am not stupid. I did not touch her directly, since there was a high possibility that she was contagious by now. There was a lot of clothing in my cabinet and I wrapped fabric around my hands before I lifted her up and laid her down on my bed. The whole time I was very careful not to touch her with my bare skin. I could feel the heat of her skin even through the fabric, so much that I was honestly worried the fever would fry her brain before the night was over. There were not a whole lot of options to cool her down, but I had a few bottles of water and a bunch of fabric, so I soaked a random shirt and draped it over her forehead. I wasn't sure if it made much difference, but I changed the cloth every 30 minutes or so. Lilly was unconscious most of the night. She woke a few times, but when she did, she was delirious. Unable to keep her eyes open, muttering my name and coughing like she wanted to push her lungs out. I couldn't do much for the 3 hours we were locked in and that made me terribly anxious. The majority of the time I just sat beside her, held her hand with my fabric-wrapped hands and changed the cloth on her forehead from time to time. Internally, I was panicking. It took all my self-control not to run around in circles and scream. The time until 4 in the morning felt like the longest 3 hours of my life. I waited until 10 past 4, just in case my watch wasn't entirely precise. Then I changed Lily's cloth one more time, checked my watch again, just to be safe, and exited my compartment. Now that makes it almost sound calm. To be honest, I ran outside and hurried through the train like a headless chicken while frantically looking for the detective. I found him like I did last time, sitting next to a window with a cigarette between his lips. For a moment I allowed myself to wonder if he slept in this position or if he was simply not human enough to sleep at all. I didn't ask, of course. First of all, that could be considered an offensive question and I did not want to offend one of my only allies. And second of all, I had something more important to worry about. "Mr. Detective," I said. "Please, I need your help. Please." He looked at me and I was painfully aware that I stood there with disheveled hair and wrinkled clothes and trembling with fear. For a few seconds, he was silent, then he nodded and stood up. "Lead the way, kid," he told me. I hurried on, glancing behind me every few seconds to make sure he was still following me. Luckily he kept up with my pace as I almost ran through the wagons back towards my compartment. I came to a sudden halt when I saw the man with a briefcase walking towards me. He did objectively not look threatening, but he still scared the shit out of me. I did not feel like smiling, but I still managed to smile regardless of my mood and took a step to the side to let him walk past me comfortably. "Good morning, sir," I greeted him. Politeness was key, wasn't it? He looked at me with his pale eyes, reciprocated my smile and wished me a good morning as well, before continuing his way. So yeah, that's how I survived another encounter with him. The detective didn't comment on that and we went back to the compartment without another incident. I let him in and immediately went over to the bed where Lilly was lying. Her thin clothes were already soaked with sweat and I changed the cloth on her forehead again and also began to wrap some cloth around her wrists. "There was a plague in the town we visited," I explained to the detective. "Lilly got infected, I think she's dying. Please, save her. The fever is killing her." He seemed to consider my words for a moment, blew the smoke of his cigarette in the air, looked at my dying friend and said, "What do you think I could do about this?" That's when I realized my genius plan had actually been pretty stupid. For some reason, I had expected him to come up with some magic cure for a disease he knew nothing about. The rules had told me I could trust him. Not that he would magically solve all of my problems. I stared at him in shock, completely frozen by the realization of the fault in my thinking. "You can't do anything," I whispered, and it was a question and a statement at the same time. He shook his head. "Sorry, kid." I wrapped the wet fabric around Lily's wrists. "I can't let her die," I stated. "There must be something I can do." "Did you forget your rules, kid?" he asked. "They told you about the beggar woman. She can help. Remember when I said I'm not stupid? Maybe I should reconsider this statement. The rules made something very clear, even though it wasn't said outright. Only ask the blind beggar woman for help when you have absolutely no other choice. Her help wasn't free, and I could imagine that she wouldn't ask for something simple as money. I didn't want to ask her. But letting Lily die was not an option either. "I'll go find her," I decided. "Could you stay with Lily? I really don't want her to be alone." He looked at my sick friend, then back at me and nodded. "I'll wait here." "Thank you, Mr. Detective. Really, thank you so much." "You're welcome, kid," he replied and sat down next to the bed. I then hurried off to find the blind beggar woman. I found her after checking 3 wagons. Considering the size of the train, that was incredibly fast, but at this point I was fairly certain that these entities could feel when you were looking for them and just appeared in your close proximity if they felt like it. Or maybe I was just lucky. Really, who knows? I had expected her to be old. Very old, with long white hair and wrinkled skin and dressed in a linen dress. That image had been so thoroughly burned into my mind that I didn't even recognize her at first. She was in her mid-30s maybe, had dark skin and wavy dark hair that didn't quite reach her shoulders, and she wore dirty trousers and an ill-fitted gray pullover. This woman just looked nice. "Hello," she greeted me with a warm smile on her lips. "You were looking for me." That might sound paradox, but the fact that I wasn't scared of her at all scared me. I knew better than to trust the entities around here, also because I did a lot of Googling about inhuman things, and like every single article had told me to be wary around them. But there was something about her that made me want to trust her, and that fact alone was really unsettling. I forced myself to stay alert as I sat down next to her. "My friend is sick. Can you help her?" "The rotting plague." She nodded. "I can save her if you want me to." I wanted to say yes, please help her, do whatever you have to save her life. But the rules had told me to ask another question first. "What do you want for this?" Let me be completely honest. I'm still a selfish person after all. I would do a lot to save Lily's life, but there were a few things I wouldn't do, even if that would ultimately result in her death. I would not die for her. If saving her would require my death, there was nothing I could do. Surviving was still my top priority, after all. I also wouldn't stay on the train forever, so if the payment were my ticket, I wouldn't take the deal. Murder was also off limits, whether the target would be human or inhuman. I wouldn't be capable of that. Luckily, the beggar woman requested no such thing. "Have dinner with me in the dining wagon this evening," she said. "Then I'll heal your friend." I felt my blood run cold. The dining wagon was something I had been avoiding up to this point because there was just so much that could go wrong. On the other hand, my vending machine diet started to make me sick, and I was dying for a real meal. "I don't know if she survives that long," I told the blind woman about my main concern. She shook her head. "Your friend has more than 24 hours left until she is beyond saving. Don't worry about that." She didn't lie to me, I was pretty sure about it. Like I said, I had Googled a lot. Things like this fulfill their promises as long as the price for the bargain is paid. And it could have gone way worse. She could have demanded my right hand or my firstborn baby or something. "Fine," I finally agreed. "I'll have dinner with you and you save Lily. I'll wait for you in the dining wagon at 6. She was still smiling at me. I thanked her for some reason, said goodbye, and made my way back to my compartment. It was a few minutes past 5 in the morning. I had 12 hours to pass before I could fulfill the bargain and save Lily. Although the blind woman had said there were more than 24 hours left for her, seeing her condition worsen by the hour wasn't exactly encouraging. It had to be mercy that she was asleep most of the time. She woke sometimes, and when she did, she spoke about how she felt it growing in her lungs, how her organs were rotting away, how her mind was burning up. I tried to tell her that everything would be okay, that I made a bargain with the blind beggar woman and that she would save her, but I wasn't sure if she registered my words at all. And when she wasn't awake, she suffered from fever dreams, threw her head from one side to the other and tried to punch at non-existent threats in the air, but she was too weak to lift her arms. It took about 4 more hours for the black spots to appear on her skin. When I had seen it in the village, I had thought about discolored skin like the Black Plague had caused. Now that I could inspect it from a closer proximity, I realized what it really was. Mold. Black mold, growing directly on her skin. I tried to brush it off with some wet fabric, but it grew back faster than it should be possible. 4 more hours and she started coughing up patches of mold. It woke her up a few times and she leaned over the edge of the bed and tried to push it all out of her lungs. She was crying at this point, scraping her fingernails over the black spots on her skin until she fell unconscious again. After 12 hours had passed, she didn't wake anymore. She lay perfectly still, no more violent nightmares shaking her body, her breath was shallow and her eyes were overgrown with mold now. She was still coughing, still spitting rotting patches onto the blanket, but it didn't wake her up. Her body was basically radiating heat, the air in the compartment had become sticky and feverish like it had been in the village. The time to meet with the blind woman had finally come. The detective had stayed with me the whole time. He wasn't able to help, so I didn't let him touch Lilly because it was enough if one person got infected. So he just sat next to the door and smoked his cigarette. Not multiple cigarettes. Just this one, for 12 hours straight. I didn't like these entities. They looked so human, but were just weird enough to make you question your sanity. He promised to stay with Lilly again and in return I promised to come back as soon as possible. I changed into a dress because I wasn't sure if the dining wagon had a dress code and then made my way towards it. While walking, I went over the rules again and again. There was a possibility that the dinner would be entirely uneventful, but I didn't have high hopes for that. At least the rules were fairly simple. Red bow tie? Fake an illness. No face? Run like hell. White-haired woman? Cut yourself. Considering my luck until now, I would get one of the faceless people. I really hoped the blind woman wouldn't consider it a broken promise if I had to run for my life. The dining wagon was objectively beautiful. It looked like some upscale restaurant with wooden furniture, heavy curtains, pretty folded napkins and chandeliers on the ceiling. On first glance, the guests looked human and I didn't bother to look any closer. Classical music was playing faintly in the background. I took a moment to admire the ambiente before I saw the blind woman already sitting at one of the tables and went over to her. Perfectly in time, she commented as I sat down opposite of her. "Wouldn't dare to be late," I replied. She asked me how my friend was and I explained her condition honestly. She nodded. That's when a waiter arrived and brought the starters. To my surprise, he looked perfectly normal, had a face and a black bow tie. I was allowed to eat, without any complications. The blind woman and I didn't talk after that. I was devouring the food which honestly tasted amazing and also I had no idea what to talk about. I finished my plate much quicker than she did, after basically starving for days. While waiting for her to finish I turned my gaze to the window and since it was already dark outside, it showed our reflections clear as a mirror. I looked perfectly normal. The blind woman did not. The reflection looked painfully old, her skin was wrinkled and calloused and tinted slightly gray. Her hair was also gray, disheveled like a bird's nest and her smile revealed a row of sharp fangs. Only the white, blind eyes were the same. I had to keep myself from jumping up and running away as fast as possible. The blind woman noticed my fear and laughed. "Reflections are a fascinating thing," she said. "They tend to show a thing's true face." The grotesque reflection was mostly a reminder of what I was dealing with. The blind woman, the conductor, the man with the briefcase and most likely also the detective. They were monsters. Even if they looked human. "What are you?" I asked her. She raised an eyebrow. "Do you really want to know?" Yes, I wanted to, but that was not an answer she would give me for free and one bargain with her was more than enough. "No, it's fine. I don't have to know." She nodded at that and we continued our dinner in silence. The main course was brought by the same waiter and I dared to hope for an uneventful dinner. We'd fallen silent again and I was careful not to look at the reflections again because it was easier to ignore what truly sat in front of me. Nothing was ever easy, of course. Right after we finished our plates, someone dropped the dessert in front of me. I looked up and saw not the waiter from before, but a tall woman with pale white hair that almost reached the floor, dressed in a white dress. Shit. I glanced at the table to consider my options and all I had was the knife I had just used to eat the main course. Since I didn't have much of a choice I grabbed it and cleaned it with my napkin. My hands were shaking as I cleaned it. Then I pressed the blade to the palm of my left hand and pulled back. Do you know how sharp restaurant knives are? Have you ever tried to cut yourself with such a blunt object? I can't recommend it, it doesn't work and hurts a lot. It took 3 tries until the cut was deep enough to have blood flowing. I held the injured hand over the plate and let a bit of blood flow onto the food before I closed my fist and looked at the white-haired woman. She didn't acknowledge my questioning look, just took the plate and went away with it. The cut burned horribly. I wanted to stop the bleeding, But I didn't want to put my dirty napkin onto the open wound, so I just sat there and watched the blood drop onto the desk. After a few minutes, the blind woman handed me her own, clean napkin. "You paid the price," she stated, and for a moment I wasn't sure if she was talking about the white-haired woman or a bargain, but then she put a thermos on the table. "1 cup for you. Then 1 cup for your friend every hour until it is empty. This will cure her." I thanked her, took the thermos, and when I stood up I noticed my blood had disappeared from the tablecloth. I sure hope the train liked his meal. I returned to my compartment and did exactly as the blind woman had instructed. I poured 1 cup of the brownish liquid for myself, and it tasted bitter when I drank it. I guess Lilly had infected me somehow, but the disease was in a very early stage, so 1 cup would suffice. Then I poured another cup and made Lilly drink it. I spent the following hours feeling sick and coughing up black mold. Yes, it was exactly as disgusting as it sounds. I threw up at some point, from the rotten taste that was left in my mouth. I struggled to give Lilly the next dose of her medicine and collapsed onto the floor again, trembling and still coughing and with a paralyzing bellyache. The detective did not offer his help, but he brought me water a few times and I appreciated that. He stayed until sunrise, when I gave Lilly the rest of the medicine and I was finally feeling alright again. I thanked him before he left. Lilly woke up shortly after and asked what had happened. I told her everything from the moment she collapsed until now, and she cried and thanked me 1,000 times and hugged me, and then she threw up a pile of black mold. Yes, it took quite a while to clean the compartment. Lilly is fine again. There is no lasting damage from the disease. She slept in my compartment the following nights because we were both scared something would happen again, but she seems to be perfectly healthy. So that's how I visited the dining wagon for the first time. I'll update you guys soon on how this nightmare journey continues. Until then, be careful who you ask for help. The price could be higher than you expect.